Okay, greetings and welcome to Legali's Pan-African Community News Update. Today's date is the 10th of March, 2024, and I'm Brother Dr. Toyin Agbetu. In the studio with Sister Oleander. Sister Oleander, are you with us?
Greetings, everybody. Hope you're having a lovely day. I know the weather's not been what we would want it to be, but it is what it is.
It is. And for those of you who are celebrating it, happy Mother's Day as well. Now, we're going to go over a review of the community news as it relates to us over the last couple of weeks. If you're watching live, you're welcome to interact with us through Facebook, YouTube, or Twitter. As usual, it's always great to have you giving us a mic check, a mic check, and just comments and feedback, letting us know how you're doing. And of course, don't forget to share the link if you find it useful, you think it'll be helpful to other people, or you can subscribe and you can like and all the doodah things. I'm going to get started.
We've
Tom?
already got a response. So, Mr. the 4-3, greetings to see you again, Dr. Toyin and Sister Oleander. Once again, thank you for the Zoom meeting last week. It was an honor.
Oh, give thanks. So much appreciated for you being here as well with us. That's cool. Okay. And yeah, so I'm going to get started with the program. We start with libations, as most of us you'll know. We are going to this week. We didn't actually have anything from the UK, which I mean, I suppose that's a good thing. Even though obviously it's likely that people have passed away in the UK. So this is one of the issues that we struggled with as a community, that we don't really send out information about our community passing. We tend to be very insular and keep it to ourselves. Well, when we're back in the Caribbean, back on the continent, it goes into local gazettes, local newspapers, and that's kind of what I've always done, is through the Yansapa radio program, and also obviously through this Pan-African Community News broadcast. So this week we're going to have a focus on us, an international focus, and hopefully next week, if you have a libation, someone that you know who's recently passed away, you want to share or you want to commemorate, you're welcome to send us an email. So I'm going to move on, no further ado. And the first libation is an immemorial. And this is to our brother, Desiree Akinbiyi. Now, he was 30 years old when he passed away in 1993. He was a severe asthmatic, and he lost his life. It's very difficult when you talk about deaths in custody, because sometimes you want to be careful that you don't euthanize it as if it just happened and if it couldn't have been prevented. But he did die in his cell in Belmarsh prison, and this was found to be brought about by a complete lack of care. Now, there was an inquest into the cause of his death, and we found out that the doctor in charge at the prison had not recognized the seriousness of our brother's condition. Like I said, he was a severe asthmatic. And so even though the inquest recorded a verdict of accidental death, which was brought about by this lack of care, we also found out that he'd been taken to the prison clinic 3 hours before his death for a routine asthma treatment. And then even though he still continued to have difficulty breathing, he was just placed back in his cell. And so, yeah, we remember and we do this in memoriam. And I say, just as a comment, one of the things I just want to highlight with these kinds of story is that I do worry about the state of our community media. I think that without the work of organizations like Inquest or the IIR Journal, which is amazing, Colin Prescott and the team, talking about Darkest How and them not doing that works. And I think it was it Pascal who was doing something called The Alarm. We had people kind of like producing, real powerful media, which let us know what was going on. And, without that now, at a time when we have 24-hour internet and, YouTube and Facebook and Instagram and all these channels, it just baffles me that we're still not documenting the way that they did back in the day when they had nothing. It's often said in Pan-Africanist circle, look what Garvey achieved before the internet with his, with his whirlwind. And the reason why I say this is because when I was trying to find an image of our brother Adesire Akinbiyi, I couldn't find anything. I searched and I searched and I searched, and I found these amazing journals and pieces of work that were online still, which somebody had taken the time to archive. Something I want to do with the Legali website. I have to make it into an archive for that time when I become an ancestor. And I found a campaign against racism and fascism journal, which you can see here. And what saddened me was that to know that 31 years ago, the issues that they were dealing with are exactly the same as we're dealing with now. If you can see the image on the side, the far right of it, you can see there's a story talking about Joy Gardner, because she was murdered by immigration officials, and she died in custody in a horrific way. And if you can see the image, I'll blow it up. Actually, if you look at the image quite closely, you'll actually be able to see that's Jeremy Corbyn, who was standing by the family and pushing for justice 31 years ago on these kind of issues. The other story they're talking about is exclusions at school and anti-immigrant rhetoric, and the whole issue is actually about the racist vote and how politicians are using and weaponizing immigration and race for electoral gain. And it just scares me that this is exactly the same stuff that's happening today. It's outrageous, but the politicians are using the Daily Mail, the Telegraph, the Sun to do their bidding like usual, but we don't seem to have the pushback that we used to have. So I just thought I'd share that, because I couldn't find a picture of our brother, and that horrified me, if I'm going to be honest with you. So we do remember him in memoriam. I'm going to move on to the next slide. And this one is outside the UK. This is, basically what's called the Low Massacre. It took place on the 11th of March, 1986. So this is actually 38 years ago, almost 40 years ago. And this is when police in Azania, or South Africa, fired upon over 3,000 young people protesting against students who were being prosecuted for challenging the Bantu education system in Kangwane. Now, for those of you who don't know, the Bantu education system was the Boer, the apartheid regime's way of stripping away African-centeredness, knowledge, language, philosophy, and kind of like producing this kind of I don't even know what to call it, this training, this kind of like a banal form of education, which was of no use to us as a people. But they were protesting, some of them had been arrested. And so a group of 3,000 young people, I think it was more than 3,000, went to the court outside. Kind of reminded me of what happened with the walk when people came to the police station, and the other time when people came to the court, so people come to support those. And what happened was that the authorities, the apartheid authority, took out their weapons and started shooting, as they do. And they killed several people, injured many, many more. And when they looked back over it, they found bullets in the back of children. I mean, they literally shot the children as they were running in their backs. Now, the massacre did start with the killing of a single student, Mandela Lekulini, which was, like I said, during a student protest about Bantu education. And the issue that we're also raising wasn't just about education, but it was also the fact that the government was spending taxes that it forced from the African people to build prisons instead of building more houses. So it was an awful time. And I'm saying all this, and this story was quite relevant, even though it's 30 years ago or 38 years ago. If you think about what's happening in Palestine, you think about the conditions that we face here in the UK as well. If you think about the education system not being fit for purpose, the exclusion system, how that works. But here in this particular case, the families of the murdered children, there were 8 of them, are still seeking justice. There is an SABC news report which you can find on YouTube, which they did an anniversary around 10 years ago, because there was the Truth and Reconciliation process, and that didn't actually secure justice for many, many families. So we remember our fallen heroes, our young people, and that's Mandela Lekulini, Connie Sibia, Mandela Shabangu, Saul Makabela, and many, many more. And the good thing that they're doing in Azania, which you can do in a country where you are now part of the government after struggling and resistant for many decades, is that they're now naming schools, streets, parks, and bridges after those young people who fought for the freedoms that we are still struggling for to this day. And I'm going to move on. The last We remember, or I say remember an in memoriam, it's quite a strange one, is to our elder Charles, I think it's Vernon, the V stands for, Hamilton. Now, this is a strange one because he didn't pass away. I normally do it, things that pass away during the 2 weeks that we go online as an anniversary. He passed away in November, but we didn't hear anything about it. So I only found out about it like a few days ago. And I was, again, trying to figure out what's going on. Why? How can someone like Charles Hamilton pass away and we don't know about it? And now I've actually found out a lot more. So just to give you a bit of backstory to him, he was a philosophical godfather to the Black Power movement. And he worked together with Kwame Ture, or you might know him as Stokely Carmichael. And they together coined the term institutional racism. You might recognize or remember their Black Power manifesto, which was published in 1967, called The Power or The Politics of Liberation. It's a classic book. If you haven't read it, you should really check it out. And it talks about institutional racism and personal racism. It's the first time that these words were used. In the UK, of course, they're assigned to, what's his name, Macpherson. And everyone pretends that he came up with the term, but it wasn't. He plagiarized our brothers. And so, like I said, it was Kwame Ture, but working together with Charles Hamilton, who was also a scholar, a teacher in what they call historically Black colleges. Now, why did we not hear about his passing? So why is it now March, but we're finding out that he passed away in November of last year? Well, apparently what happened, a friend and a colleague of his said that he only learned about his death from a representative of his bank. Apparently, it had not been previously announced because our elder was a private and modest man, and he was actually concerned about what would happen or what would not happen upon his passing. So he made arrangements, so he just stayed quiet, and I think that's quite a shame. He made a massive contribution to our thinking, our ideological thinking. A lot of the rights, a lot of the thinking that we take for granted now, kind of come from him and Kwame Ture working together. I've got a quote here. He says, it must be clear by now that any society which has been color conscious all of its life to the detriment of a particular group cannot simply become colorblind and expect the group to compete on equal terms. And I know that, over time, people found him contentious because he was saying that when working against institutional racism, we don't just focus on African people, we focus on all people, even though he was the person who co-authored this Black Power movement. So people got upset with him, some of the people in the movement. But what he was pushing forward for was this whole idea of recognizing that, actually, it's, we've got to understand politics in its wider context. And that, when people say that, America in particular starts saying like it's gone colorblind because the election of Obama and blah, 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 that this is complete nonsense. Even if they were colorblind, even if they were saying they're making policies, which we know is not true. And we'll see that with with what's going on in the States. We'll talk about that later. Even if that's not true, we know that we've got to be mindful of that kind of thinking, that kind of like segregated, narrow kind of thinking. We have been disadvantaged structurally for so long that it's not possible just to pretend that racism has vanished and everyone can live happily ever after. There must be reparation. There must be changes. Anyway, I'll leave that there. We remember an in memoriam to our elder Charles V. Hamilton. And that's the last one for the libations. You are watching the Galleys Pan-African Community News Update. Just remember, if you're watching live, you're welcome to interact with us through Facebook, YouTube, or Twitter. Please don't forget to subscribe. See you.
Yes. So we have a message from Kai. Greetings, one and all. Thank you for the information with regards to the Church Commissioners Fund a few days ago. It's appreciated, loved, Carl.
Thank you. And thank you for reaching out and letting us know that you kind of received it as well. That's good.
And one more. Grand Rising, beautiful African family, Brother Toyin, Brother Dr. Toyin, and Sis Oleander. Love your work as always. Respect.
Give thanks. Much appreciated. And thank you for just touching base and let us know you're out there watching and listening. And just to remember everyone else, Yeah, thanks, Sister Oleander. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and share. You know, you can share this link if you find the broadcast is useful, or you think there's other people who would learn something from just watching it today. That's fine. But I'm going to keep going on because, as always, we have quite a jam program, and we're trying to get the length a bit more concise. So I'm going to keep moving. So the next section is now looking at general domestic news affecting our community in the UK. And so, just as has been mentioned by our, was it Kai? Did you say, or Kay? Thank you. There has been movement in the reparations movement, and that sounds like a pun, doesn't it? I don't mean it to be a pun, but it has been some changes. There we go. There has been some developments in the reparations movement in the UK, and I say that, and I'm not trying to be sarcastic, because this movement seems to have come from the Church of England. Now, those of you who are familiar with the Church of England and the Codgerton plant and their involvement and and kind of like sanctioning of the enslavement of our ancestors, let alone a colonialism, will think, what on earth are you talking about? Well, if you're not aware of it, what's happened is that the Church of England has announced it's going to have this £100 million fund to address past wrongs, and that's basically meaning to do anything to do with African enslavement. And I'm not going to go into that. It's another story. I think we touched upon that. They're saying they're going to find a way to invest it in new businesses and stuff like that. I have issues with that as well, because often when we talk about investing in people setting up businesses, what about those who are not setting up businesses and who are working, or who need help in education, or who need help in healthcare, or so I mean, but that's another issue. The reason why this story's come to the fore is because there's been some pushback on this, and some of it has come from inside the church, and often, as we can expect, a lot of it's come from outside. But the consensus is that £100 million fund is clearly not enough. So Justin Welby, who's the Archbishop of Canterbury, is saying, well, actually, what we might do is try and get this up to £1 billion. And then that's sent all the red tops, the racist rabid papers a bit crazy, like £1 billion. And so they've gone around on the national television talking about reparations in their stupid juvenile way, as usual. But from this program's perspective, what I want you to also understand, it's not just about this fund, this issue. What we also need to recognise is that the Church of England board decided by a unanimous majority of 364 to 0 votes, that all parishes, and I mean all parishes, have to develop local action plans to address racial injustice, and that the diocese should collect relevant data on race and ethnicity. Now, this is really important. This is the house, them trying to clean their own house. You might remember that in 2020, Justin Welby said that the church was still deeply institutionally racist. And even though he went on to say, I'm ashamed of our history and ashamed of our failure, we've been waiting for 4 years really to see some tangible results from that. And so that results has now materialized in this kind of like this reparation fund. I don't really want to call it that, to be honest with you. I think I shouldn't do that. This investment fund. It's been, I think, developed with help of the oversight group. And the oversight group, as you can see in the image, and we've got our beloved Sister Esther, brother Patrick Fernan. So we know there are some people in there that we're familiar with. I'm not familiar with most of the others. I have concerns about grassroots representation. I wasn't able to join the Zoom discussion, which means that something's going wrong with the reach out that they have on this program, which means that it's probably, just taking a shot at the image, probably not representative of the young voice as well, which is also an important kind of like voice that has to be represented in reparations talk. But the image of Reverend Rose Hudson Wilkin, who you can see on the right, who I can't remember her status. They've got some first, and she's a lovely woman. I mean, she used to work in Hackney and support us when we was challenging stop and search, but now she works at a different higher level in the church. And she said that the issue of racial justice was not just an optional extra that the church can choose to address if they feel like it. She said that lip surface won't do, and neither will ticking boxes. That essentially, to make change, the church's feet must be held to the fire. Now, she is a part of the church, and she's fully on board with the church and looking at it from the church perspective, but she is also looking at it from an African perspective. She, I've known her to be quite ethical in her practice, supporting us with sickle cell and other issues as well. So, yeah, that's unpacking that particular story. I'll move on. We'll keep an eye on this one, and let you know any developments that come up from it. The next story is, it's something we're seeing happening. I think we're going to see this come to an end very soon. In Liverpool, it's been announced that there's going to be a £2 million race equality hub set up. And this is a good thing, right? It's the same argument that aims to support employers and agencies to employ or to enable people running minority ethnic businesses to thrive. So it's not just looking at African people, but their idea is like, they want to open up the hub. I want to make sure that Liverpool becomes one of the most diverse and the most richest, kind of like fairest and most equal places in the country. So I can't be upset with this, and I'm not upset with this. But again, the legality perspective is exactly the same thing as with the previous story, is that we need to ensure that when people are doing these kind of like investment into entrepreneurs, is also understand that not everybody is going to run their own business, and that people need to be able to secure decent education, decent healthcare, good jobs, decent homes. They're also in need of investment. So it's not just about giving loans out. That's kind of a trick. But I do like the fact that it's £2 million going into Race Equality Hub, especially if you heard the precursor, the talk just before the recent budget. The comment was sent by central government, quite clearly that local authorities are going to have to stop investing in diversity and inclusion measures and initiatives. And this is something they've copied from the US. So if you're not aware of it, I mean, we call it EDI in the UK, equality, diversity, and inclusion. But in America, they call it DEI. It's the same thing. But what's happened is that central government in America has, defunded EDI or DEI programs, and that, what's that saying? It happens in America, and America sneezes and Britain catches a cold, some nonsense like this. But the point is that initiative, where defunding of EDI initiatives is taking place on the national level, has now reached the UK, where places like the NHS, places like councils, local authorities are being told that if you invest in these kind of initiatives, we will cut your funding. So this is a good news story, but we need to be cognizant of the bigger picture. I'll move on with that. This one was an interesting story. It's one of the reasons I love doing this program. You kind of like pick up things that you don't really, I don't give much thought to. So car insurance quotes were found to be a third more expensive in some of the areas of England where the biggest minority ethnic populations reside. And that's even, where there are lower levels of crime or similar levels of crime or road accidents. So there's no real explanation for this. Now, we only know about this because the BBC did a investigation, I think it was a Freedom of Information request, and started to get this data, trying to find out, why is this price different? You can see from the image, why is an average quote in one area like just under £2,000 and the other quote almost £3,000? Now, the insurance body obviously said, well, look, ethnicity was not a factor in pricing, blah, 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 statistics, they're going to start saying, they used artificial intelligence, blah, 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 whatever. But the Citizens Advice Bureau said the findings certainly added to evidence of an ethnicity penalty. And that's, I find that very interesting, because, they did a survey. This is the Citizens Advice Bureau in 2023, it's last year. And they found that 15,000 people from ethnic minority communities were charged at least 40% more on average than European people. So there's certainly something happening, depending on where you're living, that your insurance will be high. And so it seems like, what's that got to do with, that's not a legality kind of thing, is it? Right? But it is. If we forget, we're talking about, we're living in cost of living or cost of greed crisis. So, we're used to fuel bills going up and that being an equal opportunity exploiter. But, there are certain things that are discretionary, right? And, kind of like car insurance or house insurance. I mean, this is just about car insurance. Is that based upon where we live, and is that being bumped up because there are less people of European heritage around us? I mean, it's very interesting, I think, and so I want to keep an eye on that. That's actually a piece of good work that the BBC has done, even though people might think that it's not that important. But this leads to other areas like loans and grants and interest rates and stuff. But yeah, I'll move on. Okay, it's one of those ones. Okay, so I don't know how to say this one. So this brother, I'm not going to call him this brother. This man, Roger Harriet, you can see in the image. He's basically been jailed for life after murdering his sister. I mean, as an organization, we don't do wrong and strong. We have bad ends within our community, and we report the news as it is. It's a horrific story. I'll try and spare you all the details. But he waited for his sister. She's a mother of two, Sandra Harriet, to leave her home. She shared that home with her elderly mother in Huddersfield, and he went up to her with a 55-centimeter samurai sword and started attacking her in the street. And this just happened last year. He'd been previously banned from approaching his sister after a string of confrontations in the past. But when she attempted to flee, she just came at the house, and he came up to her. He got out of his car and came at her with a sword. He struck her in the face. She fell on the floor, and then he slashed her 7 times. You think that's not bad enough? He then decided to stab her twice. She started moving on the floor, kicking, trying to defend herself. He went towards his car, and then for some reason, the bastard, excuse the language, the guy just turned back round and stabbed her once more in the chest. And then he stops, she stops moving, and then he leaves. And then he goes into a police station and says, "I've killed someone. Can you open the door and arrest me, please?" Now we know this because there was CCTV footage, and so he's been caught. He can't hide, he can't defend his actions. I don't know what to say, but he's been jailed for life. I don't know if this is a link, and I should say it, but I don't know. This attack on his sister took place just 8 days after his own son, Giovanni Harriet, was sentenced for murdering a schoolboy named Kahari McLean. So it's something in that family. The males, I don't know what's going on, but we remember Sandra Harriet, and it's just a horrific story. But we need to know that this is taking place. His son was a murderer, and now the father's a murderer. And the last one on this kind of like tip is Stefan Huer. This is a 51-year-old from South London who, basically he called the ambulance to look at his mother because she had these injuries on her ribs and her spine. And he said that they were caused because she kept on falling due to her dementia. But then we found out now that he called emergency services. They came, and despite him telling the operator and the people who came that he had attempted CPR on her chest and now broken her ribs, they worked out that this was impossible to have happened. That what he did could not have caused the fractures that severe, and that he actually murdered his 68-year-old mother. He showed no remorse in court. He was found guilty. What burns me is that his mother had moved from Barbados. She had come to the UK to live with her son the year before he murdered her. I know it's International Women's Day or week, because yesterday was Women's Day, but perhaps this is a good reminder of why issues about violence against women and girls is so important. This program, we talk a lot about racism. We talk a lot about Afrophobia, but violence against women and girls, misogyny is killing. It's killing our community, and yeah, I don't have the words to explain. This. So I'm going to move on. Okay. Oof. Oh, Sister Oleander, please let me. I'll take
Yeah. We have a comment, but it's actually not about what you just spoken about. I'm just I don't know what to say about that. I'm just so
I
speechless.
can't hear you, Sister Oleander. I don't know if it's my side or your side.
You can't hear me. Can you hear me now?
You're not muted, so it could be something on my side. I don't know. Do you want to say something?
Yeah.
I've got you back.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you. Sorry about that.
Okay. No, I was just saying that it's really sad to hear what you've said. It's just awful. So there's a comment from Virginia Spats regarding the previous two slides that you gave,
Greetings, Virginia.
saying not just defunded DEI here in the US, but making critical race theory illegal, firing teachers, banning books, attacking librarians, and more. We are in such an enormous whitelash.
Yeah, I've heard, and it's coming to. Well, I say it's coming to. It is here at the UK. And thank you and greetings for being with us.
And then there's one more from N saying mental health is a serious issue within our community.
Yes, it is. And thank you and greetings again. No, it's got a taboo status, and that's one thing I think, because it has that taboo status. We don't address it in the way that we need to. We talk about it every week. I don't think, if I'm going to be honest with you, that those last two cases have anything to do with mental health. I think that those two men are just evil. I don't use the word evil very often, but I think it's calculated, and I don't think that's anything to do with mental health. And I think there's a danger when we conflate mad and bad, and and that's often the debate that happens. Some people have mental health and they don't go around harming other people. In fact, most people who have mental health challenges are at risk to themselves more so than others. It's the media that ramps up the rhetoric that makes people frightened of those who might have mental health challenges. But it is a good point. It is something that we need to tell. The last story for this section.
There's one more from Virginia. She says, "We hear her."
Yes, we do. We do. Thank you. And the last story, and again, I mean, I could talk about violence against women and girls again with this particular issue, but I just wanted to highlight that yesterday there was an amazing protest for a ceasefire in Palestine, and just support pro-Palestine kind of march support was just beautiful. But what I also want to remind everyone is that there was also a protest talking about the conflict and escalation of violence that's taking place in the Congo. And that received, as far as I can see, no media coverage whatsoever. None. I hope our own national paper covers it, because we only have one paper left, because the state kind of like drove out the New Nation, which was a shame. But yeah, now just to remind you, the Congolese diaspora and supporters rallied in central London yesterday as fighting between the DR Congo armed forces and the M23 rebel groups intensifies. Now, what they're saying is enough is enough, because these conflicts aren't even about the people anymore. It's just greed, and it's about mineral wealth. And for those of you who don't know, many of the minerals in the Congo are essential in the productions of the technology that we use, such as smartphones and car batteries. And if you know about e-vehicles, that's a big commodity right now. Now, what the group did is that they marched and campaigned, and they blocked Regent Street outside the Apple store to make their grievances heard. But like I said, there was nothing on mainstream news, and simultaneously we heard a continuous demonization of the calls for a ceasefire with the Palestine marches. So there's a real pushback trying to say that actually that clown Farage is one of those, and as well as the Prime Minister saying that we have to, well, not we, but the government wants to limit the right to protest So maybe you can protest once every month or something. So it's a timetable, you ask permission, and kind of like get it signed off, then get insurance, get marshals, pay for that, do some fun, and then you can go on a march along the route that's got to be approved. And this is what they've tricked us into thinking civil disobediences, but clearly it's not. So I just want to remind everyone again that the conflict in the Congo is taking place, as it is in other places around the world, let alone Africa. And we have to be mindful about what's in front of us and that we see and what we don't see, and be aware that our minds are being steered, they're being guided. We remember the way that the Ukraine-Russia conflict was mapped out, and then we remember that even though we didn't want to see anyone dying in that conflict, we saw the way that African people were being treated and not allowed on trains, and took kind of like just women just deciding to actually raise funds and support the students who are trying to get home, trying to get to freedom, to actually get them out of Ukraine. So it's a very complex thing, and we have to have our own our own perspective on these things as well. We can have sympathy, but we have to have our own perspective. Okay, so you are watching the Galleys Pan-African Community News Update. If you're watching live, you're welcome to interact with us through Facebook, YouTube, or Twitter, as some of you already have. Please don't forget to subscribe. You can like, you can share, and all the sort of stuff that I'm rubbish at. If you find this broadcast useful, please tell someone as well, share it with them, raise the consciousness about what's going on in the world. Now, this next section is a review of politics around the UK and stuff that's emerged in the last couple of weeks. Sister Oleander.
Talking about politics, Mebmar Lamin Sham, sorry if I messed up your name. Greetings, my brother. What is your take on George Galloway MP? We were talking about that, weren't we?
We were. Okay. I'll try and be. Well, greetings, first of all. It's a good question. George Galloway isn't Corbyn in the sense that he's a good maverick in the sense that he speaks it plain, and I like him for doing that. But he is not a reliable ally. So I'm glad that he's been elected. I'm glad that the people have voted for him, and he's going to Parliament, and he can bring voice. He can voice issues that the establishment would rather have buried. But it's very important to remember that he's very fair weather. He moves with whatever's in his interests. So even though I must admit I do like the way that he roughs them up, it makes me chuckle. It sweet me. I can't lie about that. I'm old enough to remember him on Big Brother curling up like a cat with Rula Lenska, and also to remember some of the comments he's made when he's on channels that are outside the UK when he thinks we're not listening. So he's okay in one level, but he's consistently inconsistent on certain things, but he's far better than the existing. I'd rather have a whole political party full of George Galloways than this current brand of Labour. So I hope that helps. Okay, so let's continue with the politics. That's a good intro to it. And I want to start with what's a really disgusting story, actually. And this is the one about our sister councillor Sonia Winifred, who's actually resigned from Lambeth Council after having to endure a 6-hour grilling from the Labour Party for voting in support of a Gaza ceasefire motion. Now, this is a kind of this is why I say people like George Galloway are far better than the existing Labour Party. So what happened was that the Green Party in January put forward this motion for a ceasefire, and it's important to know now that Labour is now saying that it's calling for a ceasefire. I mean, it's so fair weather. And so the Labour whip, I hate that term. I so hate it. But the Labour whip instructed all Labour councillors to vote against the ceasefire motion. But she said, well, actually, this is human rights atrocities. These are human rights abuses, and immediate ceasefire is the right thing to do. And now that Labour's moving towards it, I'm going to vote towards a ceasefire. And so she voted, for the ceasefire. And actually, she came into work, and they grilled her for 6 hours. Like, why did you do that? You shouldn't have done that. You're not working as, you're breaking the collective rule amongst us. Right? So she just resigned. In the end, she resigned. She's worked for them for years, doing community work. We can't afford to lose people who are working with a conscience at a local level in the council. We already know that some 100 councillors have resigned since the start of Israel's assault on Gaza, and it's just horrible to hear this. But yeah, this is politics, right? We now have David Lamin and Keir Starmer running around saying that they're calling for a ceasefire, as if we don't remember that 5 minutes ago they were saying that no, Hamas has a right to defend itself. They're all complicit in what's taking place, and I will never ever forgive or forget their actions. But yeah,
sorry, Toyin, you said Hamas has a right to defend itself. You mean Israel has a right to defend itself?
Did I say Israel has? Well, actually, best not say what I'm going to say. But yes, sorry, I didn't. We'll move on. Yeah. Let me just keep my mouth shut because I'll get vexed. Slip of the tongue there, or was it? Here we go. So where were we? Oh God, politics for real. We're talking about EDI, right? So look on the screen, and to the right you'll see Michelle Donan. Now she's a minister in the UK government. She's the Minister for Science, if I remember correctly. How they picked them, I don't know. Anyway, I think it's around a month ago. I remember on Twitter, she accused 2 members of the Research England's advisory group of sharing extremist views. In fact, she accused them of supporting Hamas. She accused them of being extremists, and she told the UKRI, which is like the funding group, that they must get rid of them, or they're going to lose their funding. This is what this gangster's doing. This government is pulling that out all the time. You had that with Oliver Dowden, with the museums and galleries, saying that if you take down any statues or change anything, we're going to cut the funding. So this is what's happening. And this is my world now, the research world. So you can understand, it's an EDI group. All they're doing is working to make sure that there's equality, is inclusive practices inside research. And there isn't right now. Right now, the same people get the same funding, and it's the same thing. So she wrote this letter, published it on Twitter, and accused them. Thankfully, the 2 women, that's Professor Katie Sang of Harriet University in Edinburgh, and Dr. Kamna Patel of UCL, University College London, that's where I'm at, they actually pushed back and they went to court, and they challenged her. And and I'm so glad I did so. Not everyone can afford to do so. Not everyone has that privilege. What happened is that now Michelle Donan has had to retract her statement, which she has. She's had to pay £15,000, but unfortunately that's come from the public funds, and that's outrageous. So it means that you and I, the public, are paying this fine for her. But what I like about this is that it exposes the corruption. There is it's just clear. The fact that she's still in a job is amazing. I mean, in any other, if you use it in any job, anything that had ethics, you'd be out of a job for actually abusing public office. I mean, the Nolan principles clearly states that she's not compatible with having a public office. She's just not. But anyway, this is politics, and this is again is the push against EDI. So this is one, I suppose, good story where someone's tried to rough up EDI and they've actually come a cropper. But the fact that she still has a job means that not enough has actually happened yet. We still got some way to go, and it means again, it's like when those people use those super injunctions. It's like we're still in that realm where people who are fighting to clear their name have to have access to to sufficient resources for legal representation. So when I was accused of being an anti-Semite, and I tried to push back against it, and even though I had to go against City Hall because they didn't support me, I didn't have the funds, and this is the problem. A lot of the people who are being attacked don't have the funds to challenge, and so your reputation gets tarnished. And so like I said, it's a good news story, but keep in mind, because I think we're going to see a lot more of this in the few coming months.
So we have a comment from Nebari. Lamin Sham saying, give thanks. That's regarding George Galloway, your comment.
What?
He did say the UK is not as racist as other European countries.
Well, I said that.
No,
Or
no,
do you
he's
mean he
talking
said that?
about George Galloway said that.
Oh, well, that's you know what? It's funny because there's a big debate right now going on about the hierarchy of racism, and it's what's that guy, the one who always sees anti-Semitism everywhere, David Baddiel. He was on Channel 4 News saying that he invented the term hierarchy of racism. It's very funny because when Diane Abbott used that phrase, she was kicked out of the Labour Party, the whip taken away from her, and he says it, and he's not anti-Semitic, right? Anyway, so he's on there saying all this sort of stuff, and it's very interesting. But I think we got to be honest about this: is that different European nations enact racism in slightly different ways. So some are overt about it. So some of them are very, bombastic about it. Some of them are, behind closed doors about it. And the way that the English, or the British way of doing racism, is very like this. Like this particular story. You put something out on Twitter, you write a letter to the funding body, and you tell them, like, you know what? It's like, if you don't stop what you're doing, we're going to pull the money from you. Now, this is racism. This was actually attacking, kind of like a minority ethnic, expert who's addressing, racism inclusion, in the sector that this minister works at. She should be funding them as opposed to actually doing it. So Britain does its racism in a slightly different way. I'm not saying you don't have your hooligan type, your EDLs and your Stephen Yaxley type stuff, but it also has that slick way. You go somewhere else, I mean, Poland, for example, and I mean, things are marginally better in Poland, but I remember some of the work I had to do legally. We were always having to have engaging in fights with the Polish High Commission office. We were writing back and forth because we'd get stories. People would come to me with some complaints, and I'd have to write to the commissioner and say, "Look, you're roughing up one of our people over there." Rah rah rah, and they'd come back to me and say, "We don't have racism inside Poland." Rah, rah. But they were more overt with it. So I don't think it's useful to think. I mean, Galloway might say that Britain is less worse than others. I don't think that's a very useful way to see it. I think it's the way we look at this is that different groups, different European nations impact different minority communities, different marginalized communities in different ways. If we look at what's going on in Australia with that, with the Torres Strait Traits people, Aboriginal people, and the way that that they're being roughed up. If we look at the way the Amerindians in America are roughed up, these are all different expressions of colonial settlerism, all expressing their racism in slightly different ways. Exactly. In some ways, we're talking about complete genocide. In some ways, we're talking about containment. In some ways, we're talking about poisoning. I mean, African Americans and kind of like the imposition of drugs, the imposition of alcohol in Australia's. It's not useful to think that one is better than another. We should just want to eradicate racism, full stop. Yeah. So sorry for the rant.
That's okay. That's okay. But I mean, it's true, and it just kind of reminds me of even that dramatization of that movie, but a real story of the Amerindians and what they did to the people by slowly killing them. The one with
oh yes,
what's it called again?
The Moon. Oh my God, I've forgotten now. The Scorsese film, The Killing of Flower Moon. It was an amazing film.
Yeah,
amazing.
And I know that reminds me of it because that is just slightly. It's kind of mad when you think about how the whole thing went, but actually it was true what they actually did to the people, and
yes,
it makes it no better. It's just different how people treat people, indigenous people around the world. It's just disgusting. But anyway.
I mean, no, The Killing of Flower Moon is quite remarkable in a way that it was documented by the people themselves as well. So I mean, they were involved in how Martin Scorsese rendered it. I know some people critique it, like the women didn't have a strong enough voice. It's like, it was an amazing film, and it's up to people how they want to interpret it. But one of the things I find as a scholar activist amazing about it is that it highlights a non-state actor. So normally we're used to the state being the force that enacts the racism, is structural. But in this situation, it was private individuals, and I think we forget that. Like when we think about slavery in the UK, we think about colonialism in the UK. It wasn't always it didn't start with a state. It always started with these private actors. So the Royal African Company or the Royal Indian Company, I've forgotten what they call them. They have these stupid little names. And what happens? You have a gang of rich merchants, like in Bristol or in Manchester, or wherever they are. And they start exploiting, extracting, murdering. And then the church sanctions it, the monarchy gets involved, and then they nationalize it and make it into an industry. And so, that film there was actually very good because it was showing that small room where it was actually the people in that town. It was a very, a good example. And this is why we've got to be careful about how we see racism, because it doesn't have to just be the prime minister or the government that does it. There are very powerful forces in nation states who sometimes hide behind closed doors to enact the most racist, systematic violence upon people.
Okay,
Sorry.
so just a few more comments, really quick ones. Learn to dig 2 pits. I love that name. Sends peace.
That's a good one. Peace to you as well. The name and the title don't go, but learn to dig 2 pits is a good one. It's a good one.
Marcia Rigg, she sends greetings.
Oh, Sister Queen, good to have you with us. Greetings.
And Learn to Dig 2 Pits says the 7 principles of public life at Nolan Principle. Excellent.
Yeah, I mean, it's their rules, right? What's the point of having your own rules for transparency, honesty, selflessness, all these kind of, and you don't stick to them? I mean, it's madness. And then there's no sanction if you break them, you violate them, and you get engaged. It's a madness, but that's where we're at in the UK. I'll best move on. This story's been running on for a bit long. But talking about, this is the politics section, right? So, we can't talk about politics without coming to the chief in charge, and that's our Rishi Sunak. And this is a ridiculous story, okay? Absolutely ridiculous story. Now, there's a play coming out later on this year, I think it's in a couple of months' time, called The Slave Play. Now, I don't particularly enjoy all these kind of things. I'm going to be totally honest with you, but that's not the point with this particular story. So it's coming in, and it's going to be in the West End, I think. I'm not sure. And they're going to have what we call a blackout session on there. And now, all of a sudden, we've got the PM talking to his spokesperson and sending out these stupid messages about being a big supporter of the arts and that the arts should be inclusive and open to everyone. And again, that line, particularly when those art venues are in receipt of public funding. That's the exact words that came from the PM spokesperson, particularly when those arts venues are in receipt of public funding. So it's a threat, it's a gangster threat, it's kind of like a Corleone move, right? And they're saying that actually, no, they shouldn't be having a blackout session. Now, for those of you who are not aware of what blackout sessions are in theatres, now we know that, and the theatre industry itself has admitted that it has a lack of diversity among its audiences. It's exclusive, right? It's sometimes you want to see a play. The play might be about something that's relevant to us, something that can edify us, that can lift us or can teach us, and the tickets will be something like £80. And it's just completely exclusive, it's completely elitist. And then when the price comes low, the theatre industry's been moaning about, those unwashed are coming in, they're singing along with songs, they're spoiling the whole thing, you can't take them anywhere. So they're really elitist, the theatre industry. They recognize this. So what happens is that some productions have what they call a blackout night. And a blackout night means that they're putting out a special invitation to the African community. And they're saying, look, we're dealing with something like Windrush. So if you're of African heritage, and you kind of feel it, those who feel it know it, come in, experience it, and you'll be amongst your own. It'll be a safe space to have that. It doesn't mean that other people can't come, but it's a specific invitation to kind of build a safe space. That's all it is, right? Because 99% of the time, if you look at the proms, it's a so-called whiteout. So kind of they're saying actually every now and then we're going to have a blackout session. You know what I mean? It's kind of like, it's like if you go to, I get these emails from the Picture House and they have these silver screenings, right? And they have these mother and toddler sessions, right? It's like, am I going to say, well, I'm a man, right? And I haven't got a baby. My babies are all big now. So why am I being excluded? It's like, cut their funding. They shouldn't be in receipt of public funding. Well, that's what the government is saying. In fact, it's so bad that one of the Tory MPs have actually come out and said, I hope the production and theatre promoters reverse their decision and apologize. Apologize for what? So I haven't even seen the play. I probably won't even like it because I'm done with some of the way our history is being exploited. I'm not feeling it. There's only a few people who know how to talk about slavery without making us look like clowns and idiots. But the principle about having a safe space and actually building inclusivity, making the arts accessible to everyone by doing whatever it's taken, by positive discrimination, it's annoying. So politics, this is playing to the gallery by the Prime Minister coming out and saying these kind of things. What they're just doing is pandering to the racist amongst the ethnic majority and just trying to say, look, I'm on your side, right? So it's an interesting story. We'll keep an eye on it. But it's not the first time, it's not going to be the last time that we're going to hear this kind of stupidness. And talking about stupidness, I think I've mentioned it quite a bit. This year is going to be democracy year on steroids because there are elections in the UK, probably in November in the UK. There's going to be elections across Europe. There's going to be elections in the Americas. And so people are going to be saying, vote, 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 vote. And, we'll talk about those things as the year goes on and what happens. But what I just wanted to highlight is something that's come up. I'm not going to talk about generative AI technology, in any depth. That's a big passion of mine and in one area. But what I will say is that we have to be mindful about what we see and what we accept as truth, because the technology has now reached a level where it can create images, not just images, still, it can also create videos. If you haven't seen some of the videos that have been created by the new ChatGPT platform and seen how authentic they look, right now going around social media, I think there's an image of the Kate woman, and people are spotting that it's actually probably partially AI edited because the things are not quite right and stuff like that. But the videos, the footage are getting to a level where what we call deep fakes are almost impossible to determine from reality. And so what some supporters of Trump's campaign, and not Trump himself, there's no evidence that it's coming from Trump himself, but his supporters have been doing, is producing the images that you can see on the screen, which has shown him hanging around with African Americans and as if he's one of our friends. And they've been sharing it and they're trying to encourage African people to vote Republican. Obviously the picture of him and Martin Luther King is just obviously it's bogus, but the quality of the images are so convincing that when you have repetition of this, when you keep seeing them over and over again, your mind starts to shift. It's very cleverly done. So I just want to kind of put something out there for us, just to be mindful of what we see on social media. Don't believe everything that you see. Don't even believe all the platforms that you used to trust in the same way. It's like, whenever you see something and it seems like it resonates with you 100%, and you're not, but it's like, wow, I didn't know they're going to come out and be so truthful like that. Check it somewhere else, correlate it, try and find a couple of other sources to make sure that it's true. I always look for a source that I trust and a source that I do not trust. And then I see what both are saying, and then I make my own decision based on kind of like the ideas of kind of what they're both saying and my own personal instincts. I never trust one or another. The days of being able to trust papers like The Guardian or the BBC are finished. They're done. You can't do that. Even if you call yourself a liberal, you can't do that. You have to do independent research. And the reason I'm raising this is not just obviously we're in the UK, is that I want you to be aware of this tactic with Starmer's Labour Party, because this guy is not an honest guy. And I think that he might not do it, but his supporters may do it the same way it was happening with the Orange one, trying to get back in the White House. And I think that he's going to win. I actually suspect that Trump will make it, but we'll see what happens. Whew, okay. So, welcome, greetings. You're watching Legali's Pan-African Community News Update. We're live. If you're with us not watching the recording, then you're welcome to interact with us through Facebook, YouTube, or Twitter, just like others have. Thank you for being with us. Please don't forget to subscribe. You can you can share this as well, especially if you find it useful. Let people know. And this next section is a review of Afrophobia and related white supremacy news from around the UK. So this story was something I found out about on Twitter, of all places. It was Nels Abbey. Thank you, Brother Nels. It's a bizarre one. So, I mean, as you see the headline, a man has been acquitted of hate crime charges over the use of alleged racist emojis. Now, the emoticons that are in question is this raccoon and this clown emoji. And it sounds like it's a fantasy, but this is actually a true case. It's a true story. This happened, I think, last week. The character on the right, his name is Ben Obese Ejecti, who is a potential Conservative MP. He decided that he is going to prosecute a brother who sent him, I think it was, I don't know if it was Twitter or what do you call it? What's the other one? TikTok or one of these other platforms. He sent him a message, and he got so frustrated with him, he just sent him these two icons, and he ended up in court. In fact, it got so bad, actually, because a Conservative MP, or I said potential Conservative MP, made the complaint. The man became part of a police investigation. His house was raided. He lost jobs because of it. He was held in a cell for 10 hours. He was put in a police car. He was interviewed under caution. He was searched. He had his phone seized, all because he sent this brother, this Ben Obese Ejecti, a message with a clown and a raccoon. Now, the prosecutor in the case argued that the use of the word coon is offensive regardless of who uses it, and said it's akin to the use of the N-word. Now, that's absolute complete rubbish. The word raccoon has no synergy with the N-word, and we all know this in the community. In fact, outside the community, people know this. But this is why this section is about politics. Well, in fact, this has moved from politics, so this is actually about Afrophobia. What we're seeing here is a man of African heritage prosecuting another man of African heritage because he won't sign off on his white supremacist ideas. Because, of course, white supremacy can be practiced. We've seen it with Kerry Badenoch and Sula Braverman by people of African heritage, and it is, unfortunately. So just be mindful again as well. It's like we are in a strange time where the establishment has journalists in its pocket, newspapers in its pockets. Thankfully, the man was acquitted of the hate crime charges. This should never have reached the court. But just by virtue that there was a police investigation which saw his house being searched, his phone being seized, interviewed under caution, locked up in a police cell for 10 hours for sending a tweet or a message on social media, is absolutely ridiculous and outrageous, and it's a sign of things to come. This is a very desperate Conservative party at this particular moment in time, and they will use anything and anyone to cling to power. I mean, so I just thought I'd share that with you. The next story is this is an expansion upon the one we spoke about earlier, so I won't need to go into all the details of it, but this is the report by the oversight group, which has been led by some African people inside there. And again, I think I said all this actually, that they've said that the 100 million that's been earmarked by the Church of England is not enough, and instead propose it should be around $1 billion. I'm not going to spend much time going over this, but you can actually go to the Oversight Group's website and look at the report that they made. I haven't had a chance to read it through, but what they do recognise is that the Church of England has these historic links to African enslavement, and that goes back beyond the 18th century. So that's where this is all coming from. I probably shouldn't have put the slide in here twice. That was there on my side. Okay, talking about reparations, but from the heritage sector, we often talk about the repatriation of icons, cultural artifacts back to the places where they belong, to the people and the communities where they belong. Well, this is actually a good news story in many ways, because what's happened is that the British auction house, Anderson and Garland, actually cancelled the sale of this shield, which was a 19th century shield, which was stolen, looted by the British government in a punitive raid. And I think that's actually a good news story. What happened was that the Ethiopian Heritage Authority asked them, please don't sell this. This needs to return to its homeland and its legitimate owners, which is the people and government of Ethiopia. And it looks like the auction house agreed. And so, they've stopped. It's worth knowing that Ethiopian officials have long been calling for the return of objects stolen since 1868. And there's more than 20 private collectors who've agreed to the request. So it's an ongoing campaign where we're seeing officials from Ethiopia stopping, halting, and reclaiming kind of things. Now, this shield, I think, was worth a couple of grand. My worry is that when it's worth something like, when I say worth, I mean, I find these artifacts are priceless. But when the sell value of it starts becoming much higher, you find institutions like the British Museum refuse to do that. I mean, they won't stop anything. And we know that a lot of their stuff was stolen. A lot of their stuff is sold behind back doors. But yeah, again, it's a piece of good news. It's just being aware of what's taking place in the cultural heritage sector around repatriation. Okay. I hate talking about these stories. Okay, meet Ben Birchall, a 28-year-old who made monkey gestures at Omar Bugle during a football match after he scored for Newport County from the penalty spot. So I think that this Ben character was really upset. So he started doing this common monkey trope. And of course, the monkey trope, for those of you sometimes we don't actually understand the terms. Why do we associate the monkey trope with racism? And just to be clear, racism isn't about the color of our skin. That's the trick we've been told. That by pointing out someone's of a different complexion, therefore you're racist. That's quite nonsensical. It's actually the belief that someone is subhuman, that someone is not quite quite all there. And the monkey trope is a dehumanizing trope. So it says that as an African man, that he is subhuman, and that's why it's racist. So he was charged with racially aggravated intentional harassment. That's what I think the offence is linked to. But because he he admitted it. He said, he didn't try and deny it. He was let off a football banning order, but given 40 hours of community service. They said that he has autism and dyspraxia, so therefore it was disableism that made him do it. It's really, really irritating to hear those kind of things. I don't know. I'm not an expert. I don't have much more information other than what I've seen from a few news stories. But it's something to share with you. But this is clearly a racist trope, and it's the dehumanizing element of it that's racist. And something I was reading an interview with Omar Bugle, and one of the things that he said is there's a part of me that's glad it was so blatant. And he's talking about abuse. He's glad it was so obvious, because now it's something that people can't deny. And that's what I like when it's still in our game. He's talking about football. It's still prevalent in life. There are some things that I know and feel are racially motivated in football. For me to explain it, people would look at me as if I've got two heads. And I think all of us who have experienced these kind of microaggressions and these overt acts of racism, we know that, right? You try to explain to someone that actually the clutching of the purse or the crossing of the road or the not touching our hands when they're giving us change, all these kind of things, we know it, we feel it, we know it. But if you try to explain it, it makes you sound like you're mad. You walk into a shop and you see the way the security guards start trailing you and start stacking stuff right behind you. We know it, right? So when they do this stuff, it's a slam dunk. It's much easier to catch. But I don't like the fact it's been blamed on learning difficulties, because I have many friends with learning difficulties and they're not racist. So anyway, we're in England and the court system's a bit messed up like that. Sister Oleander.
Yes, we have another message from Nebmari Lamin Sham saying, are they going to buy them back? Lol. I think that's the previous slide.
Oh, the Ethiopia. I hope they don't buy them. If you're talking about the Ethiopian shield, no, they should just donate them. So, but I don't know. We'll see. Thank you. Okay, I'm going to move to another story again on the same theme. This is the last one, and this is well, I mean, what can I say? So our sister Annie, and look, she's actually feeling that she's leaving the country actually, just to get away because she's just feeling stressed about the racist abuse she's faced. Now, the backstory of all this is that the former Man City and Newcastle footballer Joey Barton, who you can see on the left, he posted to his Twitter following, and he's got 2.8 million followers, I should say, saying, watching her on TV once she's a footballer commentator. She was a former England and Chelsea striker, but now she's a commentator. And he was saying on his Twitter, you have to laugh, effing pathetic. She can't move without her legs rubbing together. This is the racist part, actually, but that's another issue for another day. Get them off the men's football, off the telly. Only there to tick boxes. DEI, which is diversity, equality, and inclusion, is a load of shite. Affirmative action. All of the back of the Black Lives Matter George Floyd nonsense. Cancel me. I don't care anymore. That's what he tweeted out to his 2.8 million followers. And so what happened after that? They just harassed her. You got to understand, if he sends that out to 2.8 million, saying that she's not a good footballer, that she can't talk on telly, that she didn't have any abilities, she doesn't understand the game, so she's not a good commentator. It's only affirmative action. It's only because of Black Lives Matter and the murder of George Floyd that she's going to be there. It opens up what they call a pylon. And so that's what happened. She was inundated with racist abuse. And so she just recently sent out a 15-minute video on Instagram and saying that, look, I was just scared, genuinely scared this week. And I'm going to go abroad just because I'm just worried. My safety is important. My state of mind is important. So she's going. She spoke to, I think it was the BBC, and she said, at what point are we going to understand that this needs to stop? Sexism, racism, misogyny is not an option. Or it's not an opinion. So that's what she said. It's not freedom of speech. It's against the law. It's as simple as that. Now, I completely agree with her, because that comment that I said that he said, that is all of those. It's misogynistic, clearly. It's also racist. You know what I mean? And so all of this stuff, it's like, it's just always there. And like, 2.8 million viewers, followers, that's more than the reading of some of those racist newspapers, right? So, Annie's saying that she thinks that these kind of people who have become influencers on social media are now using hatred to promote their brands. And I think she's got a really good point there, because what happens is that what they do is that we call it kicking down. So they look down and they kick down at someone who they feel that they can have power over. And they use racism. So they hit migrants, they hit marginalized communities, they hit women, they hit those with disabilities, they hit anyone who's marginalized. And they use that to get more followers, and then they start selling them products, selling them services. So, I mean, I'm sorry for our sister having to go through this. I don't know much about her. I'm not really a football follower. But, yeah, I thought I'd share that story with you. Okay. Wow. You are watching Legali's Pan-African Community News Update. If you're with us live, you're welcome to interact through Facebook, YouTube, or Twitter. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and share if you find this broadcast useful. This next section, as you probably used to by now, unfortunately, we seem to have some every single broadcast. It'll be nice to go a whole month without some policing news, but this is policing-related matters affecting our community around the UK. Now, I'm sure you know what the first story I'm going to cover, and that is that about the police marksman accused of murdering the unarmed Chris Cabba in September 2022 in Streatham. Now, he can be named for the first time publicly as the 40-year-old Martin Blake. Now, it was a fight to get that. I'm not going to go through the whole history, the IOPC pushing, going to court. There was a whole thing about the police going on strike, even though they're not allowed to go on strike. It's a wildcat strike because they didn't want him named, but he has been named now. So NX121, or Martin Blake's name, and the date of his birth has been made public. So we know his name, we know how old he is, but his home address and images of him or his family cannot be published. So if you do find out, please do not publish them. That would be in contempt of court. Now, the judge who actually made the decision, and I really commend that judge making that decision, said that that they reviewed some raw underlying intelligence material before coming to the conclusion, and they came to the conclusion that there was not a real and immediate risk to the life of the defendant or to his family. And you've got to remember that the police, who are the armed police officers who were protesting against, him being named, they weren't really concerned that there was a group of African people who'd been watching the drop squad who were going to go, once we knew his name, go hunt him down and terrorize him and his family. No, that wasn't the concern. What they were worried about is that they can't murder us in impunity, that there was, that there's going to be a move towards transparency. And that is the right thing, that we have his name. If he's innocent, then he's innocent. And the court process can go through, he can have evidence, and that's fine. I hear that. But, there's a simple issue we have to remember. It's not right that you can kill a human being and then hide behind a mask, behind a label. And the reason why I say this is because, I was there for the whole inquest for Rashan Charles, and he's the young brother who died in 27 when the officer of the name BX47, I mean, that's all we've been given, right? BX47, who killed him, wasn't shared with us. In fact, even when we went into the inquest, they put up a black sheet between us when he was giving his testimony, so we couldn't actually see him. It was outrageous. They surrounded the inquest with police officers. So the family and a few of us who were there taking notes and supporting, they were trying to intimidate us. In fact, Sister Marcia, I remember you was there, and give thanks, So we want to prevent these kind of situations happening again. So this is a good start. And I know people are vexed with, what's his name, Rowley, because he won't acknowledge institutional racism, and he should do. But, I've got to admit that this is actually, in my lifetime, seeing a police officer being named, even though all the other officers, armed officers, who are a very violent, elitist group. I'm not saying they're all bad. They do a job. I've talked about some Africans who that guy who took the sword out to his sister, if the armed response was there and they had to stop him and they had to shoot him to stop him, you wouldn't hear a peep out of me. You understand that? So I understand that we sometimes need to use force to stop force. I believe in self-defense. But there are some amongst that group who are racist, who think that they can run with impunity, who are supported by a prime minister, a government, a criminal justice. In fact, it's the criminal's justice system. And it's about time that we start to see changes. It's just ridiculous that it's taken so long for this to happen. So, I just share that with you. And I just hope the family of Chris Kaba gets some kind of justice. I think the trial is in September. I think it's September. So we'll keep an eye on, and of course, we'll update you on what's happening here. This has got nothing to do with putting the officer's family at risk. This is all to do with the principle of open justice. And nobody who's opposed to the idea of open justice, to transparency, should be in the police force. If you are opposed to the idea of open justice, you should not be a police officer, let alone be carrying a gun. We just heard what happened in Ireland, where I don't know if you've heard about it. This is another. There's an investigation just came out a few days ago. I haven't had a chance to read it in full, but the headline is that they had an officer in there who knew that people were going to be killed, and his intervention in the Troubles caused more deaths than it saved. So I mean, open justice is key. It's key. That's talking about Ireland. I mean, if we talk about race, and I mean, I can talk about the issues in Ireland all day long. That's another issue. But I'm going to move on. Okay, so another story about policing. This one, meet David Seeger, PC David Seeger, based at Lewisham Police Station. Now, we seem to have a theme today that violence against women and girls seem to keep popping up in the most unsuspected places, on the football pitch, and now in the police force. This is not even talking about Sarah Everard. It's not even talking about Nicole and Smallman and Bibba Henry. In this particular instance, PC David Seeger told his sexual partner, who we only know as Woman A, they like to use that, and I suppose it's protecting her identity, so Woman A, he was having, a relationship with her, that he had a graphic desire to commit rape and other acts of sexual violence towards her in the context of a white supremacy setting. He sent her messages, and these messages referenced rape, forced impregnation, and slavery. This is a serving police officer. Now, again, to their credit, he was dismissed a week ago without notice after misconduct hearing, after they found that he had committed gross misconduct. And that was good. I'm glad he's gone. But the question is, how was he employed? What were his supervisors doing? What happened at his appraisals? What's happening with the vetting procedure? How is someone who is fantasizing about raping women, in forced impregnation, and enslaving them, a serving police officer in Lewisham, in Hackney down the road, where they're kicking out Sonia because she's voting for a ceasefire against genocide? So this is the kind of madness that's taking place in the UK. When people say that racism manifests itself differently, the UK does it slightly different. It silently lets in these misogynists and white supremacists. And, we have to bit by bit unpick them and kick them out and stuff. And it's tiring. Okay, let's come out of London and let me show you the next story. Just going a little bit further, right? And I'll keep the footage going because, I'm going to try and get some video footage in the program. It's a bit tricky, but I'll try in the future to see if we can do this. Now, this is a police officer for the Greater Manchester Police. And thankfully, can you see what she just did there? Can you see, stamping on his stomach deliberately? Now, he's a rough sleeper. The homeless charity Crisis said that the incident was obviously appalling and degrading. Now, the brother, who's Sudanese, was dragged by the officer. He's now found accommodation, thankfully, and he's received an apology from the force. But how did she get into the police force? What's going to happen to her? Well, you know what's going to happen to her? She's received retraining. That's it. So she's still a serving police officer. This is the issue. There's a vetting issue. How does she get in? There's the other issue about accountability, because if someone from the public hadn't filmed this, can you see her camera's not on? So someone from the public hadn't filmed it, we wouldn't know about this. She drags him along the floor, steps on him in his stomach, and then the response for the Greater Manchester Police is that she gets retraining. This is insufficient. This is not good enough. But, let me keep moving on. I think now you understand why I hate having to always talk about the police in this program. So this is slightly less, well, it's not less important. It's a slightly less visceral story from an image point of view. There's been some research conducted. I think this was from the BBC. They did this through Freedom of Information requests. And they've found out that almost a fifth of all missing persons incidents, or at least in between 2022 and 2023, there was no ethnic information recorded about who had gone missing. So that when you look to find out who was missing, it was marked as unknown. Now, this is a tricky one here, because there's an organization called Missing People, and they said that it's important that we record people's ethnicity, because that can help us find the community that might be best placed to help find those people. They'll recognize that person. They might know them, the links of where they're going to go through. The police say that, well, sometimes we don't know the ethnicity at the time when it's being reported to us. And so if the person who's making the report doesn't know this information, we can't add it. And I kind of hear that. But it does worry me. It does worry me that, we know that African people are 4 times more likely to be missing in this country, in the UK, than anyone else. And the case was so bad that there's a young brother called Dominic Norton who set up this website, missingblackperson.com. And I think I met the brother last year. And give thanks, brother, for doing this work. And he basically, finds those reports and puts them in one place to help the community itself to find those people as well. So the trick here is, like I said, this is something just to think about. It's like if the police are failing to record the ethnicity of people who are missing, then we have a distorted facts about how many people are going missing and the disproportionality that's involved. And we also have a risk that the police might not be able to tailor the searching to take best use of the community that might be able to find that person. So this is where that's coming from. I don't want to make a big case out of something that's not there. If I get it, if someone has been reported and the person reporting doesn't know the ethnicity, it will say unknown, and I get that. But it's something that there has to be a remedy towards this. Okay, this is the last story. It's again in the same vein as the others, the previous ones. And this is, I don't have an image of him. And this is an interesting one because this isn't something from the 60s or 80s. This is from 2021. And what we found out through media reports is that the police discipline panel had dismissed a detective, a Metropolitan Police detective called Neil Buckmaster, over offensive and utterly unacceptable behavior. And I think what he'd been done is that he'd been using racist language in his messages, and video games, and all kinds of stuff. He'd been using kind of racist names and stuff like this. And so he'd been dismissed, right? But what happened was that an appeal tribunal set aside the guilty finding. And so now he's actually back reinstated as a police officer. So let's be clear, and I've got to be mindful here because I can't talk out both sides of my mouth. Either I respect the process, which I don't completely respect. I respect the principle. I don't think it's actually an equitable system, or I don't. So he was found guilty of racism. He did produce, he did have messages that were racist. He did use racist names and the names of characters that he used. He had been dismissed, but the appeal, I think, said the processes weren't followed properly. Didn't have enough time to do, I don't know, whatever it was. I can't remember. I read it a couple of days ago, and I've all gone out of my head now. And so my issue is that the police reinstated him, and not only did they reinstate him, but they reinstated him and put him on a leadership course. So now, I mean, you could say, well, he's innocent, right? Until proven guilty, he's still innocent. And there's a new misconduct hearing. The date, was set, and the Directorate of Professional Standards reviewed the case and decided not to proceed, right? So he's clear, he's gone, right? I mean, so I should be happy with the process. But you know what? Something sticks in my craw. I don't know how you feel about that, right? But if there was evidence of this action, I mean, I don't know what the threshold was. I don't have all the details. We don't have an image of him. I was searching for him. I found a news article from a press magazine, and there was a journalist who went to the tribunal. Because one of the things you can do, just in case you don't know, if you have spare time, when these tribunals are taking place, you can actually go to Scotland Yard, and you can actually sit in the gallery. And normally you can just watch and listen and see what's taking place. Most people don't know that, but you can actually do that in most cases. But in this particular case, with this guy, a journalist was actually told, he was removed. He wasn't allowed to actually sit in on it. So again, this is why I had this whole thing about open justice and transparency. So I don't know what's going on here. I don't know what he looks like. I don't know anything about this guy. All I know was that he was initially sacked for racism. So the initial panel, the disciplinary panel, found that there was sufficient evidence. But the tribunal, the appeal tribunal, set it aside. Even Rowley and the senior officers at the Met are saying that this is the reason why they would rather have a senior officer make those decisions, so things like this can't happen. So all of this is kind of like asserting gently that actually this guy's a racist. So how is he still in the police, and how is he being sent on a leadership course? It's a mess, right? I'm not going to pretend I have an answer for this, but we need to understand that this is the kind of stuff that's taking place. Thankfully, that's the last of the police. No more police stories. Oh God, it always makes me. Okay, so I'm going to try and wrap this up. It's been a long program, almost at the end. This is the penultimate section. You are watching Legality's Pan-African Community News Update. Thank you for being with us if you're here live. Greetings to you if you're watching us on the recording. But if you're with us now, you're welcome to interact with us. You can say hi, still listening, still hear you okay. You can ask questions, make comments. You can do it through Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube, I think it is. Don't forget to subscribe. That's really useful. You can also hit the like button, the share button. The most important thing is if you like it, just tell other people and stuff. And those who are going to use it, let them be aware of it. That's it. I don't really care about the numbers and the metrics, but I want our community to be informed about what's taking place. Now, this closing section, look at some of the health-related stories relating to our community over the past couple of weeks. Sister Oleander.
Yes, so we have another message from Nebam Lamin Sham, and he says, I'm convinced the UK police force hire white extremists and Negropeans. Never heard that before. What a cocktail.
I can't dispel it. The evidence seems to be true that there are clearly white supremacists within the police force, and there are African people who are deputies of white supremacy inside there as well. This is a fact, or was that they won't be fired, right? I remember it was at the beginning of last year where the Met Commissioner came out and said that every single week you're going to be hearing stories of us rooting out officers, and it's going to be bad. And true to his word, that's what's happened, right? So they've known about these officers. That's why they can find them quickly and get rid of them. But they've actually tolerated them. So they're there, and those officers who are from our community who actually are whistleblowing. That's the other thing we don't really get the chance to talk about, is that we have some really good people from our community who are inside the police. I can't work inside the police. I couldn't do it. But we have those who do. And they are also facing racism within the police force. They're also being targeted, excluded. Their retention rates are awful. The disciplinary amongst them is much more extreme. So the problem is rife. And the police recruitment figures are going down. Who would want to become a police officer right now? It's a good comment. But let's move on from the police. Let's go into health. And I'm going to go to the first story. And sometimes it's nice to have politicians from our community who kind of stay rooted. And there was no massive fanfare about this, but our sister Belle Riviere-Eddy, she made a comment in the House of Commons. There wasn't a lot of people there, because that they don't stay there for issues to do with our community. But she made a comment about how this week marks 10 years since the death of her friend Donan, who had sickle cell. And she passed away after being given an overdose of morphine. And this was during a crisis. Now, there was a report in 2021 published by the Sickle Cell Society called No One's Listening. It's a groundbreaking report. And it really outlined some of the care failures that led to her death, and that of many, many others. Now, our sister Belle Riviere-Eddy, she asked the government, and it's important to remember she is she's a member of the Labour Party, so she's a shadow minister. Is that the right term? I can't understand all these different terms. So she asked the government when they're going to implement the recommendations. And so I was listening attentively to hear what this racist government was going to say, and the government said, we're going to write, I think it was Penny Mordaunt or one of them, I can't remember. We're going to write to the Secretary of State for Health for a response. And that was it. And you got to understand, they know the questions in advance. They have time to kind of find a response, but nothing. So I'm glad that our sister raised it, because sickle cell is a killer. And the defunding of the NHS has made the situation much worse for those of us with sickle cell, or family members with sickle cell as well. So I don't know what the government's going to do. I don't suspect it's going to increase funding. But we'll see. But I just want to thank our sister for raising that. And it's important that we're cognizant of that. The good thing is that, whilst our sister Donan passed away at a very young age, essentially living with sickle cell beyond 25 was almost impossible a couple of decades ago. And a lot has changed now. There are therapies to make sure that you can live like a long life. I'm not saying it's going to be without pain. I'm saying you can live a long life, but much more work has to be done. It's not enough to say, right, okay, so we've got you living longer than 25. There's also quality of life issues as well. Let me move on to the next story. This one I don't have much to say really. I read it, and I don't know, literally. I'm not going to rehearse the issue about African women and maternity deaths. We've talked about that quite a lot in this program. But what I will say is that Nottingham University Hospitals, which is a collection inside the area, is reviewing racism and instances of harm in maternity services. And the senior midwife, Donna Ockenden, who you can see in the image, is heading a review into 1,800 stillbirths, deaths of mothers or babies, or instances of harm. So she's going to do a real deep dive to find out what on earth is going on. She's already acknowledged that there's countless examples of racist and discriminatory behaviours that have already been covered or uncovered by previous review into failures not in hospitals. So we just had to wait to see what comes from this review. I mean, I'd be vexed if it's like there's racism, because we know there's racism. We want something a bit more granular now. If you're going to review 1,800 cases, let's hope that something meaningful comes out, which leads to recommendations that can change this situation. So that's all I can say on that one. And the last story on the health section is really, it's a bit nerdy. It's about a study from experts at University of Exeter who have found that there's a widely used test for prostate cancer, which you might have heard of, called the PSA test. And for those of you who know me and who kind of like nag me about this and talk about, yes, my brother, you, and you, I have taken the PSA test. I took it a couple of weeks ago as well, and I try to do it at least, I won't say once a year, but maybe once every year or two. But what we just found out from this research, our brother, Dr. Tanimola Martins, has said that there's a strange situation that the PSA levels vary by ethnicity. So what does that mean? Well, it means that African men have found to have a higher PSA levels than European men, and also higher than Asian men, who have the lowest PSA levels. So what this often leads to is actually an overdiagnosis of cancer. Now, of course, that doesn't sound, well, if you're overdiagnosis, sounds like you're being cautious, right? So that's probably a good thing. But actually, it could be problematic, because if there's an overdiagnosis and it's not an accurate prognosis, it's an inaccurate diagnosis, then what happens is that there could be unnecessary biopsies taken, which can lead to psychological distress and sepsis. So, he's doing research saying that we need to look into ensure that people get the best diagnosis regardless of their background. So it's an interesting case, because for those of you who don't know, African men are predisposed to cancer, prostate cancer. And so if you're over 50, even if you haven't got symptoms, you're able to request a test from your GP. And if you are over 50 and you haven't had a test, please just go and do so. They just give you a slip. You go to your local GP or hospital to give some blood, and they'll let you know if you've got what your PSA count. And if it's too high, then you'll come back. If it's not, you just leave it for another year or so. And it's really quick. And even though it took me years before I started doing it, I have just started, and I've had a very close friend who found that he had cancer and he had to have the treatment. So, I mean, please check it. But this is, ongoing research. Sister Oleander.
Yeah, I just wanted, on the back of what you're saying, which is to say that for all the women, the sisters that are watching this either today or in the future, this week maybe, or whenever, to just say, please encourage your menfolk to take this test. So brothers, your brothers, your sisters, your uncles, your nephews, your whatever, people, please encourage them to take this test.
Thank you. Okay. So that's the last story for this section. And we're finally going to close with our being positive section. Now, because this is a super long program, and I didn't intend it to be this long, so apologies. I was trying to get it shorter. I don't have all the events and stuff that I'd like to try and do. That's something we're still struggling with. But, usual blurb, Pan-African Community News Update, interact, blah, blah, blah. If you've got something to say before we wrap up, now's the time to say it. Like, share, and all the doodaddies. Okay, so a couple of things I want to just talk about really quickly. Okay, so the first one is the University of Huddersfield's new £60 million Health and Wellbeing Academy, which is going to be named after an inspirational nurse who became the UK's first African matron, and her name is Daphne Steele. Now, the university has announced that the building will be named after her, who trained in Balham, South London, after emigrating to the UK from Guyana in 1951. There's a whole lot of other stuff that they put out there, but for us, that's the main point there. I think that's really cool. I spoke about naming the streets and bridges and in Azania again about after young people who had given their, or whose life had been taken. I don't want to say given it; they didn't give their life willingly. Whose life had been taken. When we talked about libations, but it's good now to also have spaces recognizing the work and the efforts of those who came before us. And I like the fact it's named after a health and wellbeing academy. So yeah, that's a piece of good news. And then the final story for this broadcast is that of our young princess, Tayshalise. She's a 9-year-old, and she's won this advocacy award. She's one of 15,000 people in the UK with sickle cell, which tends to affect people of African descent. She's experienced 2 strokes. And like I said, she's 9 years old because the blood flow in her brain has been blocked. And this is one thing that people don't understand about sickle cell. Sickle cell is often associated, people associate crisis only with like pain in the limbs, like in your arms, in your legs, or in your back. But wherever blood flows is where you can have a crisis. So if you are unlucky and that you have a crisis, in your brain, then you have a stroke. And unfortunately, our princess has had 2 of those. They call them, silent strokes. She is recovering. She started a YouTube channel. She's a gamer, from what I can tell. And so she not only has a channel about gaming, but she also teaches other people about sickle cell. She reads stories about the condition in church, at local nursing homes, and she's raised more than £300 for sickle cell charities at a school event. She's amazing. I wish her well. I really wish that sometimes this program was, live in a building, in a studio, where we could invite her in and give her flowers and her props, and everyone could just cheer and stuff. But I wanted to close this week's program with her. Just as a heads up on this as well, people think that I'm very fussy about terminology, and they get a bit, Toyin's on one of his nerd tips again. The BBC article that covered this story said that sickle cell is something that affects people and they used the word Black Caribbean heritage, and that's how they defined it. And that's wrong. And when I have time, I'll make an official complaint and get them to correct it. Sickle cell affects anyone, specifically people of African heritage, primarily people of African heritage, but it can affect anyone. Sickle cell and thalassemia. Thalassemia affects people who are called what they call Mediterranean backgrounds. And so when a site, like an institution like the BBC, says that sickle cell affects people of Black Caribbean heritage, it's a misnomer. It's quite dangerous, I find, actually. The inaccuracy is so bad. So language is very important. It's like, I remember when, we was in St. Lucia, Oleander and our son had a crisis, and we was in the Caribbean, but of course, it's African people in the Caribbean. We was able to find someone who had expertise with sickle cell. When I was in Nigeria, we have people with expertise with sickle cell. In America, wherever African people are, so it's important. Language matters, but I don't want to take away from the story here, which is about our princess Tayshalise. So this is the last post. Give thanks and thank you, Queenie.
Okay, so I have. Oh, sorry, I have a few last comments. We have from Black History Walks. Oh, sorry, I should put the first one first. How Black People Won World War II at the Africa Centre presentation from Black History Walk, Saturday, the 16th of March, 2024 at 2 p.m. And there's a link here so people can click on that link when they see this later. Black History Bus Tour, Sunday, 31st of March, 2 p.m. Black History Walks, that's the link for that. And lastly, Black History Walks Blue Plaque to James Baldwin goes up in Hackney on the 17th of May.
Oh, I'll be around for some of those ones. Thank you. Yeah. And if you're living in London, if that's just in the UK and you have an opportunity, please you can go to Eventbrite, type in Black History Walks, and check out some of the events and see how our history is embedded in this nation, often hidden in plain sight. It's really important to do that, and I give thanks to our brother Tony for doing that. I am quite sad. One of the things we can't do with this program because of time is we can't do a cultural review, which is something we used to do with our radio program, which was really fun. We'd talk about films we'd seen and plays we'd seen, and we review them. I got an email from Kubara at Nubia, which did a review of the One Love film, and we just don't have the time to go through that. But it's nice to know. I think I didn't realize he said that Brother Shakara and Sister Ankobia had done a review of it. I think they have a platform, so that's something that's really good. You might want to check that out and see, because if we can't provide the cultural news, there are other people in our community who have more than enough knowledge and are, you know, really versed in breaking this stuff down as well for us. But I think that's the end of the program. So I want to thank you. I want to thank Brother Colin for his research, and those of you who shared other stories, our community journalists, because often, like I said, they're covering these stories in hostile spaces with news desks. Sometimes I don't want to promote them when people in the media are attacking them. For those of you who are Legali supporters, those of you who donate, and those of you who don't and just are with us, I really appreciate you. And of course, our community, all of you who are there watching, listening, sharing, teaching, guiding, healing. You know, we're still standing. You know, we're still doing our thing, and I give thanks to all of you. We will be back. Oh, Sister Oleander, do you want to say something?
Oh no, I just said give thanks to everybody.
Oh, definitely. There's been quite a few events that have taken place, and again, we just don't have the time to go through everything, unfortunately. But we will be back on Sunday the 24th. I did think this was going to be the last program of the term, but you know, we'll do one last one at least on Sunday the 24th of March at around 7 p.m. as usual, just before the Easter break, and that will probably be the last program for the term. As we wrap up the season, I tend to link with the teaching terms at universities and school terms and stuff like that. So hopefully you can join us then. But until then, walk good. Sister Oleander, I don't know if you have anything you want to say.
Well, I was going to say something, nothing to do with any of this, except, well, actually, it might be. I went to a really good event today, which had this group called Black Roots, and they are a group of African people who grow, essentially, they grow plants and do a lot of sharing, and they get involved with a lot of knowledge and teaching the community about plants and herbs and all sorts of things. So check them out. They're called Black Roots.
Oh, good, thanks for sharing. Yeah. And there's a lot of people out there doing some amazing works on every topic. Don't think you just have to go with the mainstream. We need to really support those entrepreneurs inside our community. We need to listen to our community radio stations, those that are actually feeding our soul, as opposed to just stoking up trouble. We need to listen, you know, we need to listen to those groups that are doing healing and counseling. And I mean, we have so much activities and joy as well. There are, like I said, this week this month I was so desperate. There was a website, I've forgotten what it's called, I think it's Thrive or something. There's that collates all the theatrical productions that are taking place in our community. We just don't have the time to cover everything. But also, okay. I'm just trying to say, make sure you exhale as well.
Yeah. And just by lastly from KB, continue with the good works.
Oh, give thanks. Okay, so I'm going to sign off as usual and say, whatever you do, be safe, be good. For those of you who know, I will be where I am always on that day in March at midday. So some of you I will see, some of you I won't. But may the ancestors continue to guide and protect us. Ashe.
Ashe.